Hey there, it's Ben McEwen for aetutes.com, here today with a very exciting video tutorial on how to create a UI inspired by Terminator, just like the one you can see here. So let's jump into After Effects and get started. So first of all, we need to get our footage into a new composition. To do this, click and drag your footage onto the Make New Composition button. Now we're going to track the motion first, so we have something for our UI to stick to. So if you can't see your tracker controls, click on Window and go Tracker. And we can click Track Motion and zoom in a little bit. Now we want to try and find a high contrast point around the part we want to track. So in this case, I would say our actor James's eye here would be a good choice. So let's line that up there. And just hit track forward. Now depending on how big your tracker is, it's going to take a while, or if you've got a tiny point like a freckle or something to track, that would be good. But as you can see here, this footage has lots of motion blur and the tracker can sometimes have a little bit of a hard time. So if that happens, I'll show you what you can do. Just hit stop, and you can track one frame forward at a time. So you can see that's sticking there pretty well, but if it doesn't, you can just click and reposition pretty easily. But that looks like it's doing a pretty good job. Now you can use page up and page down to sort of cycle through your frames in case your path is skewed. Like if this tracker point was over here, you could click and drag it back here and press page down to go frame forward. But luckily you don't really need to do that. So I'll just pause the recording whilst the track finishes. Okay, so our track's finished and it looks like it's stuck to James's face pretty well. So now we need some way to get our tracking data into After Effects to use to make all our elements of the UI stick to and follow James's face. To do this, we need to create a new null object. So you can go Layer, New, Null Object, or we can just use this pretty long shortcut. And we'll rename this Track Data. And also we'll rename our footage to Footage. And renaming really helps to keep your project file organized, especially this one, because we're going to have a ton of layers and it's going to be essential if you want to find what you need. Alrighty, so now we can go Edit Target and make sure our Track Data Null Object is selected and hit OK and Apply. And make sure Apply Dimensions is set to X and Y and hit OK. So you can see our null object here is sticking where it should, which is nice, and we can turn the visibility of that null object off just so it doesn't get in the way. Alright, now let's give our footage a little bit more of a realistic color. If we're going for that look in Terminator, we want our footage to be pretty desaturated with a bit of a red in there. So let's start off by turning it black and white. We can go Effect, Color Correction, Tint. And you can see that's already done it pretty well, but our colors aren't really contrasting that well. So if we go Effect, Color Correction, and Curves, and put in an S-curve, so we can crush the blacks quite a bit, not so much that we lose all the detail, but just enough to sort of pump out our whites and crush the blacks. Okay, now let's give this footage a little bit of a tinge. So if we hit Tint and go Edit Duplicate, or use the shortcut Control D, drag it underneath the curves and make this red. Now that's a little bit too much, so we can tone down the amount to tint. Let's make that about 20. Last thing is to create a vignette. So if we go Layer, New, Solid, we want our red color to be sort of a medium darkish red. Click OK and OK. Turn the visibility off for a second. Now if we click and hold on our rectangle tool and choose Ellipse tool, then double click, we can see it's made a mask here, nice and round, and go subtract on our mask option here, toggle down our mask options and increase the feather a lot. We'll set this to 400 and just bring our expansion in just a little bit so our edge isn't fully clear. Alright, now let's set our transfer mode to multiply, and that gives us a pretty nice look. I think I'm going to change the color a little bit, so with our layer selected, hit Control Shift Y, and we can go in here and make our red darker, maybe a little less desaturated. And okay, that's looking much nicer. Okay, let's start creating the UI. If we toggle that down, and we'll lock all these layers just so we don't interfere with anything. Zoom in here, and actually we'll turn the visibility off. Now if we hit our quotation mark key, it brings up our action and title safe layers, but what we really want is this little plus here in the middle. That's going to help us a lot to get things centered. So let's make a shape layer. If we click on our elliptical mask tool and align our crosshair here on the middle of here, and just click and drag whilst holding Control, Alt and Shift, and it makes it a perfect circle. So let's make it relatively big. Make sure we've got no fill and a red stroke. We can cycle through all of our different options by holding Alt, and that does that. Choose a medium red sort of color here and increase the stroke to about 3. And now if you go layer, new, solid, doesn't matter what color it is, I'm just going to make it bright red so you can tell it apart in here. Turn the visibility off, click and hold down on our ellipse tool and select rectangle tool. Now once again, if we click in the middle here and hold down Control and Alt, we can get a rectangle sort of pretty evenly in the middle. And if we choose our shape layer on track map, if you can't see this, just click toggle switches and modes or hit F4 and set this to alpha inverted matte. So you can see that's made a nice cutout on our circle and given us an already pretty stylized element. So let's go down here, toggle these down, and we'll give these a name. So we'll call this inner circle and copy that and name our red solid inner circle matte. Whoops. And give this a name whilst we're here and lock our layers. Now we want to make a bigger circle on the outside with a little bit of a difference. So if we zoom in and get our elliptical tool and just click and drag, same way we did before, Control Alt and Shift, and we want to make it just a little bit bigger. Give our stroke 4, layer, new, solid once more, turn the visibility off, get our rectangular mask tool and just drag it over there and try and line the bottom of it up with the line on the crosshair here. It doesn't have to be too accurate, but the closer the better. Okay, now let's set this shape layer to alpha inverted matte, which we'll use at the mask we just created once again, and we've got a thicker outside circle. And once again we can rename these outer circle, copy that, paste that, outer circle matte, and toggle these down. So we probably want to parent our matte to the circles at this point. We unlock them and we can lock them again. So this way when we get into the animating stage we can move around our circles and the masks that's controlling their shape will stick to them pretty well. So far we've got a couple of circles, so let's get on to something different and create a sort of crosshair thing in the middle. So if we go layer, new, solid, just choose whatever color you want for the solid and click OK. Let's turn the visibility off for the moment, zoom in, grab our pen tool and let's click in the middle here. And holding down shift, click out here somewhere. That'll ensure we have a straight line. If we select our arrow tool and Just move it across. I'm holding down shift and using the arrow keys to move it faster, and we just want to align it in the middle somewhere. So let's do that once more for this one. Okay. To give it a bit more detail on the inside, I'm going to create a right angle mask here. So if we hold down shift to keep the straight line, and over here again, just trying to keep the same sort of length. And once again, we can choose the arrow tool and use the keys to nudge around our mask points to try and get them evenly lined up. And hold down shift so we get our whole mask, and Control D for duplicate. So it's in here. And now if we double click on our mask, we can click and drag this side to flip it. But if we hold down Control, we have much better control and can line it up pretty closely. So if we double click off and hold down shift and use the right arrow to nudge, we can line up the spacing between here and here pretty accurately. Once again, grab the pen tool and we can just click, hold down shift and click again, and we'll create some lines across the bottom. So once more, just holding down shift and using the arrow keys to nudge the masks along whilst I duplicate them, using Control D to do that. And that looks pretty even. But where are they? We can't see anything. Well, with our layer selected and turned on, of course, we can go Effect, Generate, Stroke, and make sure all masks is checked. If we just turn our masks off so we can see what it's doing. So we've got a couple of white lines here. Now let's change this to darker red like the circles, and maybe put our brush size down a bit, and we want to change our paint style to on transparent. So essentially what this is doing is turning all our masked paths into sort of solid lines and shapes. You can do as much or as little as you like in this section. I'll just go ahead and add a little bit more detail myself. Alright, so as you can see, we've added some more detail just simply by creating more masks here. So we'll create one more element. If we go Layer, New, Solid, just make it whatever you like again. And let's grab our rectangular mask tool, zoom in a little bit, and if you've turned it off, press the quotation marks to bring them back. And just hold down Control, Alt and Shift to keep it a perfect square, and we want to make it just a bit smaller than our little crosshair in the middle here. And if we go back onto our crosshair, we can just simply copy and paste the stroke. Let's start animating all these elements we've got at the moment. So if we have our arrow tool selected again, I'll just turn off our crosshair and Control Shift H to turn off all the helpers, and we'll start with this box we just made, giving it a name. Let's call it crosshair underscore box, and this one can be crosshair. Now if we click the crosshair box layer, press P to bring up position, Alt click the position stopwatch, and let's start doing some expressions. So if we type in wiggle, bracket 0.7, 70, close bracket. So what this is doing is giving our box a random movement, as you can see here. So it's wiggling the value 0.7 times a second and 70 pixels. That's already looking pretty cool. Now for this circle. If we scroll down, we can unlock this circle, press R to bring up rotation, and Alt click on our rotation stopwatch. Now let's type in wiggle, bracket 1, 360. So this is going to wiggle our value here once a second and 360 degrees, because there's 360 degrees in a circle, so we're telling it to randomly rotate on its axis all the way around. starting to look pretty cool, isn't it? I think this is pretty complete, but just to fill it out, let's add some random numbers. Every good UI is filled with random numbers. So if we toggle down all our layers and lock them so we can't accidentally change them, and we'll zoom in, click our text tool and click, and we'll just type something. Doesn't matter what it is, it's just a placeholder. So if we toggle down our text layer here into text and alt click on the source text, and we can type x equals random, open bracket, close bracket, enter to create a new line, math with a capital M, that's very important, dot round, open bracket, x star or times 10,000, close bracket, divided by 10,000. So you can see if we scrub along here, we've got sort of a 4-digit decimal place that's really just doing nothing except randomly moving. So let me explain what this expression's doing. We're telling random to be assigned to the value x, which is handy so we can use it down here, and our math round is what's telling our text to have 4 digits. So if we didn't have our math round, you can see it's just a huge string of numbers, but having that in is a little cheat of getting however many numbers you want here. A good way to remember it is to think of it as however many zeros we have is however many digits are going to be after the decimal point. So in this case we have 4 zeros, so we've got 4 decimal places. If we add another 3, check it out, we've got 7. Let's bump it back, and if we click on our text here, let's rename it to random numbers. Okay, scale it down to about 15 pixels for the text, and let's just position it across in line with here. Probably would be a good place. Okay, now if we select our text tool again and just type in a couple of letters, IKL for example, and line it up over here. Now click on this and Control D or edit duplicate. Let's hold down Shift and move it across and down a bit, just using the arrow keys to nudge it. And let's add a different expression to this one. So if we go back, get to our source text and hold Alt and click the stopwatch, we can type in x equals time, let's say minus 11, and hit enter, and we'll do math dot round again. Remember, capital M, that's very important. Open bracket, x times 10, close bracket, divided by 10. So if you remember before, this is going to give us 1 decimal place, and let's say plus quotation mark G quotation mark, and let's get out of that. You can press the enter on the numpad or just click off to get out of our expressions. You can't really see that. Check that out. So what this is doing is getting our time value, which is a global thing. We can minus 11, and this is the same thing as before. We're doing that little hack to get 1 decimal place, and by adding anything in this bracket we can add something to the end. So we could call this umbrella, and we've got umbrella after there, but G just looks important. Also, we can add any value here, like we could put a times 11 plus 6 divided by 55 plus 3.141592. Yeah, you get it. But that will just give us some random numbers counting. Isn't that cool? Alrighty, let's duplicate these 2 layers. Control D again for duplicate. Drag them down here, just reposition them, and we will open up our expressions. If we hit U, that's going to bring up any values with the keyframe, expressions sort of count in that. And let's just change this a bit, maybe plus 11, and get rid of the G, maybe add another 0 here, just to random it up a little bit. And just reposition these to a location that looks good, maybe like that, and push that over there, and just drag it down here. So as a whole, I'll do a quick round preview. You can, whoops, kind of see what it's doing here. Got some random motion happening and just some numbers doing random things. Okay, let's create a new null object by going layer, new, null object, and we'll rename this one center UI underscore position. Now we want to get all our layers. We might want to unlock these ones, and we want to deselect our matte layers because they're already parented to these, and let's grab the pick whip on one of them and choose center UI position. And if we go Control Shift H to unhide our helpers, and check that out, we've got something that can move all our layers but still got animation independently. So this is a good point to sort of animate a startup sort of effect. So we don't really want to make it last for more than 10 frames, I don't think. So if we start on the inner circle, I'm going to go Control Shift H to hide all our masks and stuff because they'll get in the way. Let's press R, hold down Shift, press T, and still holding down Shift, press S. So that brings up our scale, our rotation, and our opacity. So if we click the stopwatch for all of these and create a keyframe, go back to our first frame, and let's sort of just play with these. We'll make that spin on a little bit, make the scale 0, and our opacity can also be 0. Now if we highlight our last keyframes and hold down Shift and press F9, so our animation's a bit smoother. So you can see what's going on, twists on and does its thing. Alright, going up the list, we'll go outer circle, so press R, hold down Shift and press T, and Shift and press S. So if we go to frame 10, same thing, click the stopwatch to get the keyframes and drag it back here. Let's set this to 180, so it starts on the top and it rotates around. That looks pretty cool. Also we want to move the scale of this one down a little bit, not completely off, and we'll turn our opacity down to 0. Once again, we can highlight all our end keyframes and hold Shift and press F9 to make that easy ease. Okay. Going up the list, we've got our crosshair. For this one, we'll just press T, and we can set a keyframe, just make it 0. Go to frame 10, make it 100. And same with the box, except this time let's highlight our keyframes and drag it forward a few frames. And once again, we can highlight our last keyframes, hold Shift and F9 to get a smoother animation. You pretty much just want to continue this process up the list, so I'll pause the recording and come back. Okie dokie. So we can see this is animating on pretty smoothly, especially liking our text over here, so they fade in like that. Starting to look pretty cool, isn't it? Another thing I'd like to mention is if we select all these elements we just made, and we can click one of these colored boxes and we'll set it to, say, yellow. So now we can tell that these are all sort of part of the same section. And let's lock all our layers just so we don't accidentally move them around, and we're good to go on to the next section. Now we're going to create another part of our UI that's going to be what I'll call the targeting system. So if we move this across, we can create a new solid, click OK, turn the visibility off, get our pen tool and create another mask. So by clicking, holding shift and clicking again, you can see that's created a nice 45-degree angle, and once more up here. Now if we go effect, and you can see strokes up here already since we used that one last. We want to choose a dark reddish color. If we use our picker, we can choose the same one actually. Okay, and let's turn this down to 1.5, and again we want to set our paint style on transparent. If we turn our visibility on, click off, you can see what that's done. So let's give this layer a name. We'll just call it targeting line. Okay. Now if we click the text tool, and we'll start off with a bunch of lines. You can either use the key above enter to make these straight lines, or just use L's or O's or any shape you want. Just create a whole series of them. If we highlight them and use this slider on our character controls so we can get some sort of even spacing between here, I'll move it up a little bit, and I'm going to change the color to maybe an orangey color just to be different. Now let's get the text tool again. We'll type in James Luke, which is our actor's name. We can click on our color and we can choose a middle red color. Let's size this up a little bit. Try and make it the same size as our lines. Looking good. And if we just duplicate this, drag it down, whilst holding shift you can keep it the same axis. So right now we're only moving it up and down on the y-axis, and it won't really come off. And double click here, and we'll change this to say targeted, and let's just scale that down a little bit more. Once again we want to line that up, and we'll get all three text elements and just move them down and across a tiny bit just to fit inside this little line we just created. So now let's zoom in a little bit so we can see our lines properly. Toggle down our lines here and click on Animate and change the opacity. Now let's put this all the way down to 0. Now if we do that again and create a second one, it's come back, but this time we can animate this going up, which is kinda cool. So if we go to the very first frame, we'll set our end to 0 and click the stopwatch, and we'll go forward about 5 frames, maybe set it up a little bit. But what we want to do is make sure we get one whole line. So at the value of 3 that's happening. But you can see it's fading in, and to be honest I really don't want that. I just want the lines to be popping up one after the other. So we can do that through expressions. First of all, if we highlight both our keyframes, right click and toggle hold keyframe, click off, and alt click on our end, so this brings up our expression editor. And if we type loop out, this capital's very important, open bracket, quotation mark, offset, quotation mark, close bracket, and click off. So you can see what that's doing. So really all our loop out is doing is taking our values here, so from 0% to 3%, and really just incrementing that in the same amount of time. So if we pull this forward to one every frame, that's what's going to happen. But let's drag that out a little bit. That's looking cool. Now for our James Luke here, let's animate that on. So we'll scroll up, click on our James Luke layer, press T, click opacity, set this to 0, and go forward a few frames, say 10 again. And just like before, if we hold shift and press F9, this is going to make our animation smoother. Cool. Now targeted, let's make this one blink on and off for something different. If we click targeted, hit T for opacity, make sure we're on the very first frame, click the stopwatch next to opacity, turn it down to 0, go forward a few frames, just pressing page down to do that, bump that back up to 100, and a few frames again, let's turn that down to 0. Should go back one frame, so they're sort of the same width. And we got the same problem here, it's fading in and out. I just want that to sort of blink on and off. So if we highlight all our keyframes, right click and toggle hold keyframe, then we can alt click on our opacity stopwatch and type loop out with a capital O again, open bracket, quotation mark, cycle, another quotation mark, and close bracket. So now I've got our desired result. That's pretty cool. So really what this expression is saying is to repeat these 3 keyframes over and over again. Now towards the end I want this text to change what it's saying. So let's go to about here, where just before it comes back on, let's toggle that up and down again, go into text, and let's animate source text. So click on the stopwatch next to that. If we go forward a frame by pressing page down, and let's just double click the T here, get our arrow back in, and let's say firing now. And if we highlight that, that was holding shift and pressing home, and let's change it to a green color. Okay. Nice. Now I want to show you a quick little trick. If we close that, press T, highlight all our keyframes here, and if we hold down Alt and just click and drag the last keyframe, you can see what that's doing. It's scaling our keyframes but keeping the same sort of spacing between them. So if we want it to blink faster, we can just drag it down here, and you can see that's blinking faster. But if we want it really slow, just like that. I prefer it faster, so I'll keep it down this end somewhere. Okay, let's zoom out and do a quick RAM preview. So that's starting to look pretty cool, isn't it? One thing we need to do is animate this stroke on. So if we click on our targeting line layer, let's set our start value to 100. We'll go to where everything sort of starts to come together. Click the stopwatch here for start. Go forward until our circle's all the way around, which was 10 frames. And let's set this to 0. Now if we click off and click back on and press U, we can bring up our keyframes for that layer. If we just click this keyframe and once again hold down shift and press F9, so you can get some ease in there. So our text comes on and nice.